Welcome to the Healthy Metal Hippie podcast, where art and wellness collide. I'm your host, Ashley, and I am so excited to connect with you today. Now, let's jump into today's episode, ready to rock and with an open heart. Well, hi, and welcome to the Healthy Metal Hippie. Today we've got Diana Mayorga with us, and she is our psychic development expert coming at you today. She is an intuitive arts practitioner, a clinical herbalist, and a Reiki master and teacher. So she also has a bunch of certificates in a whole bunch of different areas like iridology, traditional Chinese medicine. I don't know, you can tell us everything that you do. And you also are teaching at Mount Royal University in Calgary, Alberta, right?
Yes. Yeah, that's a privilege to be teaching at a university. Everyone always stops me and is like, Reiki's at a university? I'm like, yeah, I know. It's pretty cool.
And so did you develop the program there? Or did you kind of come in later?
Yes. Yeah, I came in later. So Jennifer Williams, you might remember her from Wild Rose College.
Yeah.
She developed the program. I believe it was around 2008. Don't quote me on that, but it was around that time. And then I came in 2017. And I think by 2018, she had stepped aside to go work with AHS, and I'd taken over all levels.
And it's just amazing. And I know that there are so many people, especially now, more and more every day, getting interested in the healing that Reiki provides. And so it must be just an incredible journey to take with these people while they're leveling up, right? 100%. So I thought today we'll talk a little bit about a whole bunch of topics, but let's go back to the beginnings with you and how you discovered that you had intuitive gifts.
Yeah, I love starting here, although I feel like my origin story changes over time when you get just different life experience and then your perspective shifts and you're like, oh, yeah, maybe I was working with this a little bit earlier on than I thought. You know, and I want to preface this with everyone has intuition and psychic abilities. And for me, those two words I use differently. They're a little different. I can't remember a time in this life where I wasn't picking up on things. And maybe you could say an extrasensory way. So when I was very young, and I have this interesting memory. You know, I hear some people can remember dates or numbers. They have this wild memory for details. You know, oh, where were you April 17th, 2001? And they can tell you, well, I don't have that, but I have an odd, like, emotional memory. So I can remember if someone said, what did it feel like when you were 2 years old? You know, I was in Europe for a while. I can tell you, I might not have clarity on the visual I can remember and the feelings I can remember really well. The rest of the details might be a little blurry, and that could be because my inner monologue is voiceless. I don't think in words, which I also learned at a adult age that was not the norm. I thought that was everybody. Like, what do you think in words? That must be exhausting. I was thinking feelings and pictures, which I think is helpful for this sort of work.
Right.
So I can very clearly remember at a very young age feeling, I don't know if overwhelmed is quite the right word, by the things I would see around people, mostly subtle colors. Most of my life experiences, I'll put a few aside, but most of them in this realm are not Hollywood-like. They're not like rainbows of colors around everybody.
Right.
They're fairly subtle. But saying that, if there were colors that were off or weren't the norm and were unsettling, I can visualize and feel those memories from a very young age. I think the biggest difference between some of us that have these heightened intuitive experiences as teenagers, young adults. The biggest difference that I see is some of us don't turn it off or turn it down. I don't think you can turn it off, but don't turn it down. So for whatever reasons, likely because I had some very good mentors that encouraged these gifts when I was young. That was my
Okay.
story, but I've never turned things down. I only seem to build on these intuitive psychic abilities instead of being told they weren't real and oh you're imagining things. So I think that's I think everyone's born with it. It's a birthright for sentient life. I'm quite convinced. But if we're not given the tools, the language, the structure, the framework, how does one build abilities with no help or support?
And I completely agree. And you think that a lot of it does play into like, well, that's not real. You're not seeing that. That's, being told by your parents or teachers or whoever's around you at a young age. That's when you turn that volume down, turn it
Yeah,
off.
I think so. It's kind of the use it or lose it concept, right? So I
Right.
always use the analogy of babies, toddlers. I know your mom. We think back to our kids when they were really little in that one toddler to preschooler age, and if we didn't start teaching them words for colors, if we didn't start doing those little books and activities with this is banana yellow, lemon yellow, and if we didn't give them the vocabulary, introduce textures to them, uh, they wouldn't develop that language. They wouldn't develop the understanding, and then they couldn't use it very well. Not to say that school wouldn't perceive colors, but it wouldn't mean much of anything if they didn't have language and community around them engaging with this said colors. So I think it's not any different when it comes to our intuition. We're not, if I mean, we're in a place when we're younger, odds are we don't have anyone or any systems giving us words, vocabulary, which is so important to that neurodevelopment. So if we have
Yeah.
words to describe what we're seeing or feeling or knowing, and then we have no one around us to share that experience with, to validate it and secure that neurodevelopment, well, how do we grow it? It kind of just almost disappears. I don't think it ever disappears. It goes to the background.
Right. And then, I mean, do you think that like parents could get more tuned in to helping their kids keep these kind of gifts and help them grow? And yeah, I mean, because I guess probably at that age too, where you would turn the volume down, it is going to be your parents, generally speaking, that are going to be putting those little potential blocks in,
Sure,
right?
yeah, absolutely. Don't get me wrong, like, I think there's an importance in grounding into your human at the same time. There's this balance, like with my 2 boys who are 13 and 8, I was very cognizant of right from the get-go supporting exactly in the way that you're saying, but also not trying to, influence too heavily or determine their own spiritual growth. I wanted it to be very authentic to them. So if they came to me and they said, oh, mom, I saw something in the hallway, I wanted to make sure, A, I didn't frighten them. He would say, "Oh, really? Well, that
Right.
could be a shadow person. It could be a ghost. It could be like, it could be a deceased loved one. Let's talk about what they." So I wanted to make sure I didn't overwhelm them with this paranormal realm. That even within my own belief systems, I'm not really attached to what could be real or not. I just it's
Right.
curiosity, the adventure and exploring it and trying to understand it. So I think as parents, it's a pretty uh instinctual balance where I think we know when it's like, oh, you have an ability to perceive things that maybe I'm not so tuned into, but let's have little conversations, engage, trying to discern how comfortable you are. Is it helping or is it hindering? And so it's actually a little difficult. I didn't ever have a teacher or mentor on how to parent gifted children, and mine definitely are. um,
And
but I think as long as we're not shaming them, I think that's the big thing, right? If there isn't shame involved, or I've heard a lot of my clients and students that have repressed, especially mediums, like I have a handful of students that are incredibly gifted mediums beyond what I can currently do. The stories that they share are of shame and fear from their upbringings of don't ever tell anyone about that. You don't talk about this. This isn't real, like
Oh,
pretty heavy stuff. I think that's more the sort of reaction I would not recommend.
yeah. And I mean, you do hear a lot of stories like that where, people, they do hold that shame for just being a little bit different, right? And I wonder too, even if it's like, of course, it's what would people in our friend circle say? What will the kids at school say? And all this kind of stuff. It's like, it's
Yeah.
crazy. It's crazy how people
Yes.
act. So, what kind of different abilities are there?
Oh goodness, that's such a great question. I mean, I think as humans, we really love pulling things apart.
Naming.
Yeah, labeling, like having this, what
Things.
I often, well, I make up my own vocabulary in this realm, and I call it this realm because I don't like the word new age. I'm not fond of like, oh, so you're spiritual. Like all of those words don't work for me. So I use this realm, and I have definitely made a vocabulary, not necessarily making up words, but taking words like Instagram, for example. I often use that in a way where I'll say, oh, well, the Instagram empath, because to me, the Instagram empath is not what I perceive. Empath, the definition of an empath for me is very different. The definition on Instagram kind of thing, right? So
So, what would an Instagram empath be then?
that's a good question. From what I mean, I spend very little time on Instagram, probably a few minutes every month. Um, from what I've seen, I have a lot of students that send me links and they're, oh, like, and it's usually social media nowadays. It's like, can you enlighten me on
Yeah.
this? I'm confused. Okay. So a few of the things I've been sent on this world of Instagram empaths or social media empaths. We could also lean into the term woke, the woke empath, which I whole community. I don't
Okay.
care if I say it, that the woke community makes me just want
Yeah.
to scream, like want to crawl out of my own skin. It's just, anyways. So, the Instagram empath, the biggest thing that irks me about this narrative is the victim mode. It's like we went from judging people in a really awful way, which we still do, on like, let's say work a 9 to 5, you're in an office and you don't like this person to your right because they stink, and you don't like this person to your left because they're mean, or they don't give your ego the attention you want. And now we've just added this whole new thing you can dislike people for because they have bad vibes. And it's like, oh, I'm so empathic. I can't work by Bob because Bob has bad vibes. And I'm
Oh,
just too empathic for that. And it's like, oh, come on. Like this is a
no.
terrible way to use this term that uh, the Instagram empath for me, and of course this doesn't embody everyone talking about being an empath. This
No,
just
no.
seems to be a popular description of it, is an individual who, and they usually use words like absorbs, takes on negative energy. So right away, where it's divisive language, it's like us versus them, like the sensitive empaths that only give off good vibes, like versus the
Yeah.
unwoken negative people. I don't,
No, I'm with you 100%. And I mean, I think so much of that, just like you say, it's all about ego and it's all playing on people's fears. And again, it's divisive, just like you
yeah.
say. It's awful.
Yes.
Oh my gosh. So then what does it mean to be a real empath
Well,
then?
again, I think, like when it comes to intuition, like so you're asking earlier, I can weave these questions together on what kind of psychic types or abilities are out there. And
Yeah.
I think first I would have to, just from my own reference point, describe the difference between intuition and psychic ability, because they're a little
Yes, please.
together for me. They're a little bit different. And I only have done this so that I can describe my own intuitive experiences better. So I look at
Right.
intuition in a very different way, and I've been heavily criticized for this. There's been lots of debates between myself and other teachers and practitioners. I see intuition as a very holistic human experience. So if we want to break things down, not too much, but into our spirit and then our human avatar, right? So we have our spiritual
Yeah.
selves and our human body that we're in experiencing this life right now. We have our human senses, and I don't even like to say five senses because I'm a research buff. I probably do an hour or two of research on many things every day. I didn't even realize it until my 8-year-old not that long ago said, he just stopped me. He pulled me away from my computer one day and said, Mom, how many articles do you read a day? And I was like, oh my gosh, I've never thought of that. I'm like,
A few.
lead me down rabbit holes. So, okay, whatever. I'll take that and I'll try to bring some more balance in. Anyways, so I think we actually have more than five senses, but that's for a different conversation that are connected to not just in a psychic sixth sense, but I think we have more than five human senses that are likely undiscovered. But yeah, there's a lot of science behind. I won't go down that rabbit hole. So let's just take our human senses that we're our five human senses that we're aware of at this point in time. Our senses, no matter if you're talking about a sixth sense, which I'll call that a psychic sixth sense. I'm going to use that pretty much on
Yeah.
purpose. So our psychic sixth sense and our human senses, no matter if you're looking at the psychic abilities or the human senses that are very much a part of the human body, they are all just bringing in information. That's all that any of our senses do. Our brain takes that input and makes some sort of sense of it with the software, hardware that we have. So, you see something, there's so much that I like to talk about this in class where everything from students that maybe don't know we actually see two-dimensionally and our brain puts it together in a three-dimensional way by shadowing. And I mean, all you have to do, people challenge me on this, I said, no, that's not right. And I said, okay, think about it this way. If you're looking a few hundred meters away and let's say a person is in the distance and you want to discern whether they're walking away from you or towards you, how would you discern that? How would you discern whether they're walking to you or away from you?
Ooh. Are they getting bigger or are they getting
Dang,
smaller?
you're clever. Yes, most people don't know that. Yeah. Okay. So really, what we're looking at, if you're our age,
Yeah.
kids in the hall, yes, what are you can
Yes. Crushing your head.
so they're getting larger, coming towards you, but your brain
Yeah.
perception of them moving is quite difficult. And because we see flat and our brain gives us enough, and I'm speaking about this on a very base level, so take this with a bit of a grain of salt. Um, our eyes, our ears, our sense of touch, taste, smell, they are just delivering information to our brain. Okay. I think our psychic sixth sense is exactly the same, and we shouldn't give it more power or value than the entirety of our human senses as well. So this is why I love intuition so much, and I've added my own definition to these words to make sense of it in my own mind. So intuition to me takes all of the human senses and our psychic spiritual sense, if we want to call it that, all together
Yeah.
is intuition. That's intuition to me. It isn't void of what your eyes see or your ears hear or your instincts feel. And this became really clear when we were going to Wild Rose College in the early 2000s. And I was studying microbiome. That's when the world, at least in this North America side of things, got really excited about
Yeah.
good bacteria, right? And we're talking
Yeah. Yeah.
Candida and Syndrome X, and we all wanted to know how we could make our microbiome more balanced. And as soon as I started researching, working with, oh, not working directly, indirectly with Dr. Okira's probiotic line, I
Yeah.
got really excited about this concept that our microbiome would be a part of our instinct. What if our microbiome, we're 10 trillion bacteria, 1 trillion our own cell matter. What if that microbiome
Yeah.
could be a part of our instincts? And then I found more research to validate that. Like falling in love with someone has, or being attracted physically, even just to someone, has so much to do with how your bacteria interact, how your microbiome
Yeah.
interacts. So then I started going, well, hey, that's intuition, is it not? Like, why did we have to come from this stuck up psychic realm of the psychic shit matters, but the human doesn't? It's like, what? I'm in a human body. I'm
Yeah.
having a human experience. It would be so silly to ignore it. But then we're simultaneously in the same breath talking about animal medicine and the power of nature that is very much within the physical realm as well.
Yeah.
But the human body's useless. Like, what sort of weird shadow crap is that? Like, I just started getting very frustrated with this denial, this cognitive dissonance around my human is worthless, but I'm just going to, live up here in the psychic realm and use my psychic abilities only.
And it doesn't that doesn't make sense intuitively, logically anyway,
Yes.
right? Like,
Yeah.
and you can't, I mean, and we know you can't live here all the time. You have to kind of go down, get some roots every now and then.
Yes, yes. And there's that spiritual toxicity, that bypassing that is so popular right now. I feel like the early 2000s, there was this real toxic narrative, in my opinion. This is just my opinion, on if you just think good thoughts, you'll never get.
Right.
Oh, you have breast cancer? You just don't love yourself and you're too negative. It's like, whoa, shots fired.
Calm right.
Like, it's a terrible, awful thing to say to someone. And how do you even know that's true? Like, where did that information come from, whether it be scientific or intuitive? Not that I don't think thoughts are powerful, but it's
Right.
rarely ever one thing. It's usually a perfect storm of things, and it's rarely that easy. Oh, just make
Yeah.
yourself
But I mean, it's dismissive,
super just.
right? And exactly like you say, of the whole human experience, you know.
Yeah, and who's to say you're not meant to
It,
have that exact experience? Why label someone as a failing life because they're having a certain experience that you just don't see value in? Or that's a really narrow perspective. So for me, our intuition, which is what I have such a passion for, is our ability to bring in input. So for me, energy and information are the same thing. The difference is there's energy out here. Just a good parallel is air and breath. So we know there's air,
yeah,
atmosphere, and once we take it in our bodies, it's breath. And once it's out, it's air again.
right.
So for me, energy information is the same. Everything's energy. Energy is around us, within us all the time. And once a sentient thing perceives and brings in that input, then it's information. That doesn't mean it's right or wrong, real or fake. It's just the word I'm choosing.
It's just,
It's
yeah,
just your
yeah,
processor's way of analyzing the energy that's being inputted into that software hardware. So intuition, I don't think you could get away with the naive thing, and this is where so many intuitives and psychics get in trouble, is to think that your human isn't involved, to think that your imagination isn't involved. That's one of my biggest pieces of advice. People always ask, when it comes to intuitive work or psychic work, how do I know it's not my imagination? And the answer frustrates them, because my answer is, it is your imagination. You're in a human body. How else
right.
does this happen? You bring in psychic information, you think the thoughts, you see the things, you feel the feels. How are you processing that data? It's in your
Yeah,
own body.
it's so
It's your
true.
imagination. This
Yeah.
is the very thing that's just like you're saying, creativity and wellness. You hit the nail on the head. They go hand in hand, because our imagination is the mechanism for intuition and psychic download, psychic information. I do think they're slightly different. Don't get me wrong, because you can be in a kind of a daydreamy, zoned out state, and you can get hit with something psychically, so to speak. It have very
Yeah,
little to do with your human senses at that time, but you're still processing with your human brain. And if you want to someone, you
Yeah.
certainly are going to use your human brain to do so. Intuition might be more passive. It might be a bit more subtle and perceived within the human physiology, where those truly psychic hits, let's say of prophecy is a good example. When someone gets a prophetic download where maybe they see something good or bad happening to someone they know in the future, that may
Right.
be less of the human experience and more of consciousness, right? Which we don't really know where consciousness lives, less of the human experience. And that's why I like to differentiate the two, because your intuition is something that can help you every day, all the time. And I do believe we should
Yeah.
always be tuning in with our intuition.
And do you think that, like, even though people might say, "Oh, I'm not intuitive," uh, they're just not really listening
100%.
and they're actually taking in that experience and using it anyway?
100%. I think it is, when I say intuition is a birthright, um, that's a almost a nice kind of warm, fuzzy way to say that. I think intuition is, you could call it instinct, or although our definition
Yeah.
on instinct, I think, is flimsy. It's not very,
It's more
yeah,
primal
yeah,
kind of
yeah.
in a
Well,
way. It's
yeah, and the
different.
colonizers of the world believed that instinct was worthless, useless. We shouldn't. We're better than. I think intuition. I don't think you could function without intuition, because intuition is so feeling based. Intuition is, if you think about why you get up in the morning, why do you get out of bed in the morning? It's, and I'm not saying it's your intuition getting you out of bed, but just looking at the functions of humans, they're not just built upon these physical things. We're not just getting out of bed because we have to. Something will like arouse our excitement or anxiety, for probably most of us. I get up in bed because I'm anxious. It's like, there's lots of bills to
Yeah.
be paid, or people that are going to be mad at me if I don't get out of bed. But either way, it's a feeling, right? There's is a feeling, and we are driven so much by that. And I think it's the lie that we're not, that has really separated us from our intuition. You ask anyone, you ask someone, have you ever felt someone looking at you, but you can't see? Like, it's not in your visual field, but you can feel someone looking at
But
you.
you can feel the eyes.
Ask majority of people,
Yeah.
yes. What is that? Describe the mechanisms, physiological mechanisms of this.
And, like, can you really? It's just that it's like you can feel, like, eyes
Yeah.
burning on the back of your shoulders or something, and
Yes.
it's a bit unsettling sometimes. And that's the other thing too, right? If you have that, you can feel if it's, like, a good gaze or, a not so good gaze. Do you
Yes.
know what I mean?
100%. Yes. And so I think when, like you said, when people start to, and this is, when I teach intuitive classes, I say this all the time: intuition's always there. Like, even if they're looking for that, like, how do I listen to the universe? How do I pay attention to all the signs? Whether it's an internal intuition, an external experience, an active or passive, these are all words that I like to use in describing this. I tell all my students that the first thing you need to decide, it's not even whether you believe it or not. Like, people often say, "Oh, you have to believe it." I completely disagree. No, you don't have to believe in something it for you to get curious about it, for it to exist. More so, you need to make room and choose to be present, to perceive your intuition. You have to create space and time. Otherwise, it's just happening and you're not perceiving it.
Right. And so how can people start to do that? Like, how do they take time to
Sure.
sit with themselves and be open to accepting
Yeah.
these pieces of information and in a conscious way,
Yeah.
like you say, instead of just that
Yeah.
reaction,
Yeah.
right?
Well said. I'm a neuropsychology nerd, and that, along with quantum physics being just such an obsession of mine, I started to put together some techniques. I mean, they're not really mine necessarily. They're just techniques I've learned, whether it's in rewiring our neurology. I've been healing from a PTSD experience from a long time for a long time now. So I've taken a lot of that experience. One of the first things I recommend for someone to do is to take 2 to 3 minutes. Sometimes it's a little longer, maybe even a little less, a few times a day. So, you might have the bar a little bit high of, I want to do this 3 times a day, but maybe only do it once, maybe only do it once a week. It
Yes.
doesn't matter really. You're going to build on however much you choose to practice this. And it's really quite simple. Basically, wherever you are, whether you're at work, at home, it doesn't matter. And you can, if you're at work with other people in public, you can do this quite subtly if you want to. Take a moment
Right.
to become aware of your physical self and all of the things that your senses, and we'll stick with your human senses, are experiencing. So for me right now, as an example, I would typically close my eyes, even though people probably think I'm a little weird, but I would, you don't have to. Typically close my eyes and I start off with touch usually for myself. And I would have my hands on my desk thinking, what does this feel like? And I would really go into that one experience very, very deeply. What does this feel like? Okay, it feels, I can tell this desk is not made out of real wood. Okay, well, what is it made out of? Could I guess? And how and why do I think that? Oh, it has a bit of a texture. It's a little bit cool. And then I move from that sense to what can I hear? And then really quietly focusing just on what I'm hearing. And you go through your senses to the best that you can and just choose to pause. That's the biggest thing. You're choosing to actually just pause, drop everything else, and just pay attention to your human senses. This is so important because we are in a culture where we are overstimulated most of the time. The input is too much. It's like Mr. Burns in The Simpsons in that one episode, and he has so many germs and diseases trying to cram through the door that he's healthy because there's a plethora of illness that can't get through the door.
Ew.
No one will, like, there would be one person that gets that listens to this. But so, with our intuition, if the door is crowded, if there's too much input coming in, it's there, but we're not hearing it. So if we can start off by focusing just on our human senses in the very present, because it's also about presentness, mindfulness, things we're experiencing. Then after doing that for a while, once you feel kind of good at it, which what that looks like is you're less distracted in those minutes. So 2-3 minutes, you're less distracted in what you have to do after work or what you have to do tomorrow morning or tonight or what have you. That monkey mind is a little bit less, and you're more focused on the here and now. And then once you start getting there for a while, then you can end this exercise with a minute or two of what wants to come through with no expectations.
Right.
Maybe nothing will come through for the first 100 times. We say, what wants to come through? And what can really help with this is figuring out how you interact with your intuition the most, which is your clair. What is your strongest clair? We know, or most of us have heard of clairvoyance, which is associated with the third eye. So clear, which is clear seeing, clairvoyance. But then we also have claircognizance, clear knowing, clear feeling, clairsentience, and then very
Yeah.
rarely clairaudience, which is clear hearing. This is the one we don't like because nobody wants to hear voices or hear things. Really
Yeah.
intimidating.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes, that's the
And
shortest
it's
answer I can give.
no, but that's an amazing answer because I think it'll give a lot of people lots to think about too. Again, with the judgment that we put on it, on intuition, on psychic abilities and development, and our own abilities and everything else. Like it's nice to break it down in this way, because it takes all that mystical side out of it in a way, right?
Yeah.
And I think it's important because people feel intimidated by it, or people just don't have the knowing truly of what it is.
Yes.
So I think this is great. So what kind of do you get inputs of all kinds? Do you
Yeah,
hear? Do you see? Do you know what do you hear everything? Like not hear everything, but do you
sure.
have all these different like pieces of them? What's strongest for you?
Yeah, great question. For me, it's always been feeling and seeing. So clairvoyant, clairsentient, or empathic. Those have always been my big two. I've worked very hard to increase claircognizance, which is clear knowing. This is really common with masculine energy, claircognizance, and it's the hardest. It's considered the highest form or the purest form of intuition. I don't look at it as better or worse. I do understand where that belief comes from because if we think about let's use clairvoyance as an example. When I get visuals for myself or for others,
Yeah.
I get the visual, but let's go through the steps quickly. So the information comes in, regardless of where you believe the information from, because I don't have a particular belief system. I don't have a religion I follow. I don't have a label. When someone says, "Oh, well, what are you? Are you a pagan? Are you a Wiccan? Are you a what are you?" I'm like, I don't know. I guess.
I'm just a
Yeah,
person.
right. So, the source of all of this is still a big question mark for me. But if we think of psychic intuitive information as coming through as just data energy, and we bring it in through whatever mechanism, consciousness, I don't know the mechanism, but it hits our human brain eventually and our nervous system. But at that
Yeah.
moment, we translate it near immediately. Like there's not a lot of pause between receiving that vibrational information and then translating it into a feeling, an image, a sound, or a thought. So in that
Right.
process, much can get lost in translation. And if it's a visual, well, my imagination is going to put together a visual landscape based on that data in a very specific way to me and my human experience, the things I've seen, right? So does that mean that my vision is going to be totally accurate to what the data actually was? No, it usually isn't. Pieces are,
Right.
but not the whole thing. That's for sure. So when I deliver, I can't like not yet. I've seriously been practicing this. Wouldn't it be great to just transmit that visual to someone else? That would be the best case scenario. But really, I have to describe it. I have to describe with my limited
Right.
vocabulary what I'm seeing, and even more gets lost through that transfer. Now, if you receive something through a clear cognizant, through a thought, there's less room for error. And I think that's why some people perceive
Right.
it as a more sophisticated form of intuitive psychic work, because if it's just a thought and you can deliver the thought exactly as it falls in, we're not interpreting things as much, and that can be
Right.
helpful. So I work very hard for that. I think most people, especially individuals that carry and express themselves in a masculine way, uh, they often have this claircognizance, but they don't know it. So they might be the intellect, the know-it-all people that suddenly have this great innovative idea. People like Tesla, for example. Well, I mean, he was pretty open with saying that it was like alien downloads. His invention.
Right.
But same thing. He would say that he would get these downloads of information that would just fall in as thoughts from extraterrestrial dimension.
And it's funny that you say that though, because I think that's when I get information, that's what it is. It's seemingly out of nowhere, just like a sentence, like a brief, even just a couple words, and I'm like, okay. But I've never been, I've never been able to see. I don't hear things. Definitely feeling for me, and then just knowing, and so it's interesting
Yeah,
just how everybody gets their information,
yeah,
right?
and it's often connected with our human senses. So if you were to come to my house, you would walk through the front door and you would immediately be struck with, I feel a certain way here, and it's visually, well, I mean, not everyone would think it's pleasing, but if you like plants and crystals, then yeah, you think it's pleasing, because visually it's set up in a very particular manner. Like the visual of my environment is so
Right.
important to me, and the feeling of my environment is so important to me. So we often can parallel our intuitive channels with the senses that we lean into and rely on a lot as humans.
Yeah. Yeah. I completely agree. I mean, and yeah, when you visit anywhere, when you talk about just seeing a photo of people, sometimes you
Yes.
can, you know, you'll get information. I know we were talking a little bit before about AI and things like that and the impact it has, but I would love for you to share, your thoughts on AI and the impact it's having and how people could use their intuition, their gifts of, and work on developing
Yeah.
things to help them discern
Yeah.
what's real and what's
Well, I
fake.
think firstly we have to do two things first. And when it comes to AI, and let's say you're on TikTok, some social media, or maybe you're even watching something on the news, if you're someone that still believes the news is real. Sorry, I just had to throw that out there. Like my parents that read the newspaper and watch the news, and then that's what's going on in the world. I think it's helpful, firstly, to acknowledge that the human brain is quite sophisticated. Again, I think, I have conspiracies that I like to dig deep into. I definitely don't follow the norm as far as what we're given in our day to day life in this part of the world. So I'll just preface with that. But if I think we have been told that we are not very clever, that there are some of us that are highly gifted and very clever, and those ones we will listen to and trust and follow. But the vast majority of us are not. And I completely disagree with that. I think our human brains, and I'm not even talking just about intuition, I think our human minds are incredibly sophisticated. And we've just
Hmm.
convinced they're not. So, or maybe there's some people listening that's like, no, I'm super freaking smart. Like, I don't know what you're
And then that's good.
doing. That would be really good.
Good
Most
for
people
you.
downplay their level of intelligence. So,
Yeah.
if we're coming from the reference point that I am incredibly smart and I can determine, I likely, maybe not all the time, but it's very likely I can determine the difference between an AI generated face or picture or even story, I may be able to determine the difference between that and not AI. Okay, so how would one go about that? Or, why do I even think this is so important? Well, I'm not sure exactly why it's important yet. I feel it's important. I think there's value. Well, let's think of one of the biggest scams going on around the Western world right now, and that's you get a phone call that is from a loved one, and they're saying, "Help me, I'm kidnapped." So I'm not sure if you've heard of that scam. "Help me, I'm kidnapped."
I think I've heard
Yeah, it
briefly
happened to my
about it.
auntie actually. It was really interesting hearing her version of it, although it was slightly different. So you hear someone's voice that you're fairly certain off just that first few seconds that this is the person they're saying, "Hi, I'm your child or spouse or loved one, and I've been kidnapped. Help me." And their number even shows up on your phone. So now you have these two pieces of evidence that's quite convincing. You hear a loved one's voice, their number, their contact, this is my child, let's say, in this example. So you're in panic, you fight, flight has definitely kicked in. How can one discern if that's really them or not? Because that's what they're using. They're taking any videos that you have, let's again say your child, they're taking videos that you might have on Instagram or Facebook, and they're putting enough input into the AI of your child talking that then they can hack your contacts, make it look like they're calling from your child's phone, and then use AI to generate a conversation with your child's voice. So maybe that's why a part of me is like, ooh, this could be helpful to get that little red flag inside that goes, that's not my child. And it might be because the AI is using words that this person wouldn't use. It might be the cadence of how they're talking,
Mm.
because I'm not sure AI is quite there yet. And maybe it is, maybe I'm wrong. And this would be a purely intuitive situation. But my point here is our human mind can detect whether it's an audio or visual, we can detect these differences quite easily, but we're convinced we can't. I'll give a quick example, and I might butcher this because this is a study I haven't looked at in forever. First time I heard about this is there was this movie back in 2004 called What the Bleep Do We Know? Do you remember that one? Yeah.
Right. Yeah,
That was
I
wicked.
remember.
It was so good. Well, I don't know. Maybe I'd watch it today and it wouldn't be so good, but in 2004, it was definitely 20
Oh,
years
yeah.
ago. It was really good. And there was a book published. I mean, it was big enough that there was a second movie, What the Bleep Do We Know, Down the Rabbit Hole. And in one of the books in between that they published, they talked about this study, and it was done on stroke victims that had lost a very specific, well, it lost the function of a very specific part of their brain. And I don't know the areas of the brain, so I can't say what part it was, but it was the same location, and it had to do with how they see human faces, particularly noses.
Right.
So they had this study where there was
Oh,
a handful of patients, stroke patients, that again all had this one particular area of their brain that wasn't in full function. They weren't able to perceive noses. And they had I don't know how many, could have been a dozen or more individuals walk into the room with clown noses on. Okay, so bright red clown noses that you and I, unless we've had these strokes unknowingly, probably not, you and I would be capable of perceiving the clown nose. So if you were to ask you and
right.
I what their nose looks like, we'd say, I don't know. There's a clown nose on top. I don't know. I can't see it. But for the patients, the stroke patients there, they didn't see the clown nose. They saw a nose. So the
Oh,
study was asking them to sketch out what they think the nose looks like. And then there was some tables where they could circle different nose types and just input some more data on what they perceive this person's nose is. So the hypothesis in this study was that our imagination fills in the blanks. And in
right.
this one study, it was correct. There are these stroke patients that technically couldn't see their noses because they all had clown noses on. Their brain, their imagination filled in the blank. Well, here's the wildest part, though, that they didn't quite anticipate. All but two participants, so the patients, correctly perceived the nose in all of the participants except two. So somehow these stroke patients that couldn't see the clown nose, that their imagination painted on their nose, saw it correctly and almost identically to each other. Okay. Now, there was two participants that they did not see the nose correctly. So they afterwards asked those participants to come back and said, "Hey, this is going to sound weird, but have you had anything done to your nose?" And the first one said, "Yes, I was attacked. I don't know if it was by an animal. Something happened to them and they had to have nose surgery, rhinoplasty to change to put it back together." That sounds awful. And then the second participant just had a nose job. She just wanted a different nose. So the wild thing here, though, is then one of the researchers was perceptive enough to say, "Do you have pictures of yourself with your original nose you were born with?" And they were like, "Yeah." The participants drew the original nose. Yes.
No,
Yes.
really?
Yes. So this stuff just blows my mind. This is why when we talk about AI, I think half of the battle here when it comes to taking back our intuition is to remind people that it exists. And I don't know where it lives, right? Like I'm speculating. I don't know. Nobody knows where intuition lives. Is it solely a part of our consciousness, our spirit? Is it like I believe, or I'm postulating? Does it have a lot to do with our physical human as well? It's hard to say. But from this very study, and I read this 20 years ago, from this study, it suggests that if you look at it from a purely scientific perspective, that our human brain is so fracking clever that we can take the rest of the
Mhm.
human face, which we know the human face is very difficult to replicate in a fake manner. That whole concept, you can't
Yeah.
dream about a face you've never seen because it's too complicated for your imagination to manifest. I don't know if that's true or not, but as an example, so if we accept at very least that we're very clever creatures, then maybe that's the first step to taking some power back and going, you know what, AI, I don't have to let it trick me. I can get suspicious. I can use discernment to really try to ask now. And it is something we have to have discipline in, asking ourselves, is this true? Is this information?
Right.
Picture this, is this narrative? Is it true? Now, our intuition is what's going to give us that little hint that usually for most of us, it's like a feeling, right? Give us that little nudge of something's off with this. We don't have to figure it out with
Yeah.
our human brain. We don't have to say, oh, something's off. And within this picture, the nose isn't quite perpendicular to this and the angles are off with that. And that's not how human faces are made. And there's probably people out there that know that and could point that out quite easily. But for the
Right.
rest of us, we're just going to go, oof, something doesn't feel right about that.
Right,
And we're probably
exactly. Do you think do you think a part of it, kind of just like you were talking about, making that space, do you think that's part of it, is we just need to slow down? We need to learn to trust ourselves again, or more, and and really listen into our surroundings, and really, again, reconnect with yourself.
yes.
That's like, I don't know, I talk about that a lot in my videos, just about sitting, giving yourself space, being quiet and connecting. And I think you've probably articulated it far better than I
Oh,
can.
no,
But
very well.
it's like, but I see that, and I'm guilty of it too, just kind of floating through life in some ways, disconnecting, because sometimes it's easier and sometimes it feels better.
Sure.
but but I think in the long run, when you do reconnect, then it does feel better to be connected and be present and in everything that you're doing, right?
100%. You know, you said that very well. I always use this example. Once you've connected in with your intuition enough that it really becomes a sixth sense, you wouldn't, if you lost your sight tomorrow, or if you couldn't hear things suddenly, that would be very unsettling. It would be very startling. It's like, oh gosh, like one of my abilities to perceive the world around me, to navigate it, is gone. That would be very upsetting and would make you feel very vulnerable. Once you've connected with your intuition enough that you're using it daily and using it often, you can't imagine living without it. It
Right.
becomes a sense. It's not necessarily something that you're intensely focused on all the time. And that's something that I really try to drive home in teaching in my practices. I don't believe, and this is another thing that I get into. I don't like to argue, but big debates in others that do this work is, I don't think we receive, whether it's intuitive or psychic information, because we're being divinely guided by some deity all the time. I think it's just part of sentient
Yeah.
animal. I don't think it's maybe sometimes, it's not that I don't believe there isn't moments in life where we are given a message by a deceased loved one or something that's benevolent
Yeah.
or maybe not around us. What I'm saying is when you look out your window, you're not hopefully you're not overthinking everything you see outside. You're not thinking, oh, I wonder if that tree is a centimeter bigger than it was last year. I wonder if the houses across the road were quite that shade yesterday. Like we're just using our eyeballs. We're just perceiving what's out there. It doesn't mean every bit of what we're seeing is for us and has this hugely deep divine meaning for us. It's just what we're seeing. And
Yeah.
I look at intuition the
Yeah.
same way. To me, you might be standing beside a perfect stranger and you might feel a deceased loved one with them. You might feel sadness from them. That doesn't mean that you need to turn to them and go, oh, I feel sadness from you. Like, what a beautiful thing to be, getting out of nowhere from a
Yeah.
perfect stranger. But I think because we've taken a lot of like religious paradigms and institutional kind of stories, and we've tried to place them into this work in this realm. We have those ideas, these there's or even Hollywood, right? There's these very big ideas on what this is like and what our responsibility is as an intuitive. We've taken information from really terrible resources, and it, for me, in my experience, it's just hasn't proven to be true.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think you're right about that. I think, and I do see all those people on social media too. And I think we need to really step away from all that fear about everything, and the ego.
Yes.
Oh my God. If we can step away a bit from that stuff, I think all of us are going to be much better off.
Yeah.
in our own function and interacting with others and navigating this whole world.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. It's this story of I'm special, or I'm better than, or I'm special because I have these gifts and abilities. And don't get me wrong, I understand that in the human experience there will be some of us that are more innate to art, math, athletics. That happens
Yeah.
for many reasons. And so there will be some of us that are very innately intuitive and psychic, and we call them gifts. But they are gifts, but they're no different than gifts of a mathematician, a teacher, a doctor, so forth. So it doesn't make it doesn't you can be an athlete and a very gifted athlete, but that doesn't mean the rest of us shouldn't learn how to play a sport or exercise or we all have the ability.
Eh,
uh,
yeah.
and I think that's where in our culture we're also so obsessed with these black and white, go big or go home mentalities of, well, unless you're someone that can talk to the dead or fortune tell, don't even bother. It's like, well, no, that's completely incorrect. And why it would be like giving up your sight. Why would you give up a sense,
Yeah.
an ability?
Just because someone has better eyesight than I do.
Absolutely,
Like,
exactly.
it's
So I think it's
crazy.
about grounding. Like for me, my intuitive journey has been so much about grounding this into the human experience. And whether I'm working with past life readings, or maybe I am doing a tarot reading, something like that, it's how can those tools help us now? How can this help this person in their life right now, in navigating their life right now? Not so much about adding up all the cool past lives we've had, or feeling a victim because of the things that have happened, and living in that past. That for me has nothing to do with it. Because people go, "Oh, so you believe in past lives?" I'm like, yes, maybe there's something going on there for sure. And doing past life things
Yeah.
seem to bring a lot of value to people, but I can't say for sure
Yeah.
where this information is coming from. Now, I'm not really sure its source, but I certainly think it's helpful. I've seen that.
You know what? So, Diana, you did one for
Yes.
me a couple years ago, and it was extremely helpful for me.
Nice.
And I still think about it a
Ooh,
lot,
that was a good
actually. I'm like,
one.
it just it was a good one. And it made a lot of sense,
Yeah.
like lining up kind of pieces of this life in this existence. I was like, oh no, that makes tons of sense.
Yeah.
And so they are helpful. And I think sometimes too, even if it just gives people hope and and it gives them, whatever they may need in that moment. I think that's really, really key as well,
Yeah.
right?
Oh, I completely agree. And that's where our egos have to take a big step back. It's not about you proving yourself. It's some wildly talented psychic that can know things that you shouldn't know. And okay, yeah, I love to high five myself when that happens for sure. But I also know
Yeah.
simultaneously that is not why I do this work, because that work, well, like most things in life, I don't really believe in facts in general. Let alone people are, oh, fact check that. Even like that's not a narrative I follow. So
Because there's so many
in
realities.
reality, see so many perspectives. It's just that seems like a waste of time for me. I look at it always in how did it help the person receiving that information or having that experience, like in a Reiki session, even. It's not about, oh, is Reiki real and can it cure things? And it's like, I don't, we can have those conversations, but that doesn't matter to me at the end of the day. Is
Yeah.
it in
Yeah.
value to the person receiving it? And that's all.
Leaving the person in a better place than you found them.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that is one gift that you do
No.
have always. It's true. So I know that we are running close to our time right now. And so, honestly, Diana, thank you so much for being with us today. How can people work with you?
Oh, firstly, thank you so much. This has been so much fun. And as you probably feel, I love when we can go back to our college experience at Hogwarts. I don't know
Yeah.
if you ever call it that. I introduced myself, giving it up for you and giving a background on like, and back in the early 2000s, went to Hogwarts, and they look at me, and I don't think correct myself. I just
Like, okay.
talking. Sometimes some student will be like, "What's Hogwarts for real?" It depends how playful I'm being.
Wild Rose College.
Yeah, to look back at those years and to see the few of us that are still living the dream and, we took a different path. I really admire that about you. So thank you it was such a pleasure being here and for having me. My website is my name because that was just easy to do. So
Yeah. And I'll put that in the show
sure.
notes for everybody as
Yeah,
well. Yeah.
I teach Reiki at Mount Royal University here in Calgary. I also teach Reiki one-on-one, privately. So I keep the classroom group for Reiki. I keep that to the university, and but I do one-on-one, maybe for students that just they aren't really enthusiastic about the classroom experience. And if they have
Yeah.
to study virtually with me, which they often do. So I do virtual classes. Intuitive development, I teach in person as well. I don't currently have, I did over COVID, but I don't currently have intuitive development classes online. Saying that, I do teach them privately as well. So I've had lots of students over the
Okay.
years where I'll teach them intuitive classes online. And I also have had quite a large handful of students, maybe someone like yourself that's overseas from myself, say, hey, if I got 5 or 6 people together, could we put a class online? And so that's where I find myself doing most of my online classes for intuitive development. In Calgary here, I teach intuitive development levels 1 through 3. Probably every 2 to 3 months, I'll go through another cycle of levels 1, 2, and 3. And then I have a home office that I do all my other work out of, the intuitive readings and Reiki and such.
Right. And so people can book with you for readings in person and virtually.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. And so anywhere in the world, we're in the UK and Diana's back in Calgary. And so you can book with her worldwide. And clinical, you do herbal consults as well
Yeah,
in
you know what?
person? Or are you doing that a little
I
bit or
I would
no?
refer them out. I love medicine.
Refer.
I'm like,
Okay.
do I even just take it off my website? I think I'm I'm booking usually 2 to 3 weeks at least in advance for most of my work. And I think the herbal one-on-ones that time's kind of past. I know better herbalists that are just more into it. I'm not in the natural health industry anymore at all, so I feel like
Right.
I like recommending brands of supplements would even be tricky for me because I don't know what's out there, what's working or not.
It's changed
It
so
changes every
much.
6 months. Like it's like technology. It's
Yeah.
wild. So
Yeah.
yeah, thank you for bringing that up. I haven't quite taken it off. I think I'm still holding on to it a bit, but yeah, I don't think I would book anyone in for an herbal session anymore. Just I know better
Okay.
herbalists, plain and simple.
Well, and that's good to know. And if people want that, maybe they could get in touch with you
Yeah,
for a referral
yeah,
then.
and I think the reason I have it is if I have a client already working with me, that they're a student come for intuitive readings and they just really want that service with me, then I'll absolutely do that.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, that's really good to know. I'm excited. I hope people come see you because I will tell you from experience, Diana is amazing.
Thank you, Ashley. That means a lot.
Oh, and so thank you again for joining us, Diana. And maybe we'll have to have you on again and we can keep this discussion going.
Absolutely. Thank you, Ashley, and we'll talk soon.
That sounds great. See you
Bye.
later. Bye. Thank you so much for joining us today on the Healthy Metal Hippie podcast. If you're looking for more, head to healthymetalhippie.com and let's connect. Until next time, wishing you a magical week. See you later.